God rest him wherever he is. I know that his wife is working out some sort of an agreement now with the University of Texas.
She has spent 40 years in the shadows, interviewing dying men, protecting classified secrets, and waiting for the right moment to speak. Navy officers, NORAD commanders, scientists, contractors, military whistleblowers. One by one, they sought her out in their final years. They placed their stories, their burdens, in her hands. And then they died. Now, at 81, Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist Linda Moulton Howe is breaking her silence on all of it. Not just one testimony, not just one account, all of them. Every coordinate, every classified detail, every name she can responsibly share. She said, "I must tell the truth, because the people who told me these things are dying, and if I don't, this knowledge dies with them." What she's about to reveal is not a theory. It's not speculation. It is 25 years of documented testimony from credentialed military personnel pointing to one impossible conclusion. Something enormous, something ancient, something built is buried beneath the Antarctic ice, and at least 3 world governments have known about it for over 70 years. Stay with me, because what comes next will change how you see everything. It began with a phone call in 1998. A retired U.S. Navy flight engineer, a man Linda has protected by name to this day, was in his 70s. He had been diagnosed with a terminal illness, and he had been carrying a secret for nearly 20 years that he could no longer take to his grave. He had been stationed with Antarctic Development Squadron 6, VXE-6, the Navy's elite polar aviation unit. You don't get sent to Antarctica, you volunteer. And in 1982, on a routine supply run deep into the continent's interior, his aircraft suffered a mechanical failure and was forced to make an emergency landing on a remote exposed ridge. Wind, brutal cold. A landscape so hostile that exposed skin blisters in seconds. The kind of place where you fix the problem and leave immediately. That was the plan. But while his crew worked on repairs, the flight engineer stepped away from the aircraft and stopped. On the ridge ahead of him, shapes broke the horizon that did not belong. Geometric, symmetrical, angular, far too regular and too precise to be any natural ice formation. He moved closer, close enough to see what looked like the upper portion of a massive structure, partially exposed where decades of wind erosion had stripped the ice away. It was solid. It was clearly constructed. And the material it was made from was not ice. It was not rock. It was something else entirely. Before he could get any closer, the radio crackled. Orders. Return to McMurdo immediately. No explanation, no discussion. When the crew landed, intelligence officers were waiting on the ground. They were separated, debriefed individually. Their flight logs were reclassified. They signed additional non-disclosure agreements under threat of federal prosecution. One instruction. That's all they were given. This never happened. He obeyed for 18 years. And then, dying, he picked up the phone and called the one journalist he trusted. Linda Moulton Howe recorded every word he said. She verified his service record. She confirmed his deployment history. His account included specific GPS coordinates, exact dates, and the names of other crew members on that flight. Everything checked out. But Linda was too experienced a journalist to go public on a single source. She filed the recording away. She told no one. And she waited, not knowing that she had just lit a fuse that would burn for the next 2 decades. Over the next 20 years, they came to her one by one. People who had no connection to each other, who had never met, who had been stationed in different bases in different decades, telling her fragments of the same impossible story. A geophysicist who had run ice-penetrating radar surveys across West Antarctica sat across from her with a jaw clenched so tight she could see his teeth. He had discovered cavities beneath the ice, not natural air pockets, not small voids, massive geometric chambers, some extending hundreds of meters, far too structured and regular to be geological formations. When he flagged the data to his supervisor, the man's face went white. Within hours, the entire data set was reclassified. His team was reassigned. He never saw those readings again. A Navy Seabee, construction battalion, described being deployed to a classified drilling operation miles from any recognized research station. No scientific briefing, no official mission, just drilling straight down. And at the base of the shaft, he encountered something that stopped him cold. Metallic walls. Surfaces smooth and precise, with no tool marks, no seams, no geological explanation. He stood there looking at them and thought one thing. Someone built this. An Argentine scientist from the Esperanza research base told Linda that his team had recovered small artifacts from ice cores dated to more than 12,000 years old. Every single time they found something, military personnel arrived within hours, confiscated the samples, and made them disappear. No logs were filed, no papers were published. The objects simply ceased to exist. A commercial pilot who flew supply missions across the continent described a permanent no-fly zone that existed on none of the publicly available aeronautical charts. An entire restricted corridor where civilian aircraft were forbidden, and even military flights required clearance at levels that almost no one held. He asked a superior officer what was beneath that zone. The answer was 4 words. Sensitive research. Stop asking. None of these people knew each other. None of them had read each other's testimonies. None had contact with Linda's other sources, and yet every single account pointed toward the same geography, the same coordinates, the same conclusion. Something engineered and ancient was buried beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, and the machinery of secrecy surrounding it was vast, multi-layered, and deliberate. Linda sat with all of these accounts spread before her and felt the full weight of what she was holding. This wasn't one story. This was a pattern, and it was screaming to be told. But she still didn't have the piece that would tie it all together. Not yet. It was 2016. Linda received a message from someone she would later describe as the most credible and significant source she has ever interviewed in a career spanning 4 decades. A retired NORAD officer, the highest level of classified clearance. He had participated in an Antarctic operation in the early 2000s that appears nowhere in any public record. His name is the one Linda has guarded more fiercely than any other. When he began speaking, Linda didn't say a word, because what he described didn't just add to the testimonies she had collected, it connected them. Every isolated fragment, every unexplained detail from 20 years of interviews, it all locked together like pieces of an enormous machine, clicking into place. He told her this. Beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, at a depth of approximately 2 miles, there are multiple structures of artificial origin. Not geological anomalies, not natural formations, structures, engineered with precision and intention. And they are old, far older than the ice that buried them. They predate the last major glaciation. They were constructed when Antarctica was a warm, temperate continent with rivers, forests, and a breathable atmosphere, over 12,000 years ago. Let that land. 12,000 years. That is thousands of years before the first Sumerian city-state, thousands of years before the first Egyptian dynasty, before Stonehenge, before everything we have ever called ancient civilization. According to this officer, the structures were first detected during Operation High Jump, the 1946 to 1947 Antarctic expedition commanded by Admiral Richard Byrd. Officially, the mission was about establishing research infrastructure. The classified reality, according to this source, was something else. Seismic surveys had picked up anomalies deep beneath the ice that no available science could explain, and nobody was supposed to talk about what those surveys found. Since then, he told Linda, the United States, Russia, and more recently China have been conducting covert recovery operations across Antarctica, completely separate from the public scientific programs operating under the Antarctic Treaty. Not research. Recovery. Systematic archaeological excavation and technological retrieval, concealed beneath the cover of legitimate science. And this is where it gets staggering. What has been found is not a single outpost. It is not a few scattered ruins. What has been partially recovered appears to be an extensive urban complex, buildings, infrastructure, technology, belonging to a civilization so advanced that it forces a complete reassessment of everything we think we know about human history on this planet. Some areas are being accessed through natural ice cave systems where glacial movement has created openings. Others are reached through drilling operations disguised as routine scientific research. And the technology being recovered, pay close attention, some of it is still functional. Not all of it is understood, but recovered devices are operational and are currently being studied at classified facilities. The officer gave Linda coordinates. He provided internal documents, heavily redacted, but showing classified project designations at the exact sites he described. He gave her names of other personnel involved in these operations. People she could find, people she could contact. Linda sat with all of it. 20 years of fragmented testimony had just become a single story, and that story was larger than anything she had ever investigated. A military contractor who had worked a classified drilling operation in 2003 agreed to speak to Linda on one condition. He was dying, terminal cancer, and he could not carry what he had seen to his grave. He described being lowered into an ice shaft that had been drilled to access what his briefing papers called, with deliberate blandness, a geological anomaly. The descent was slow. The platform groaned under his weight. Daylight shrank above him to a bright coin, then to a pinpoint, then to nothing. The walls were ice, white, blue-veined, silent, for what felt like an eternity. Then, over a mile down, everything changed. The ice ended. Not gradually, it stopped. The walls transitioned to a smooth surface with a faint metallic sheen that caught his headlamp. A surface that had no business existing a mile beneath an Antarctic ice sheet. The temperature shifted. The acoustics changed. Even the air was different, like stepping from one climate into another. He stepped off the platform into an open cavity, and it was enormous. The space around him was vast. The ceiling, according to later accounts from Navy SEAL whistleblowers who accessed similar areas, reached 80 feet, without a single visible structural support. The walls were constructed from what appeared to be a black basalt-like material, finely worked, with carvings covering every surface. Symbols, geometric patterns, an unknown writing system unlike anything any linguist on the team had ever encountered. He stood in a silence that had not been disturbed for thousands of years. And then he saw it, set into the far wall, framed and deliberate, a doorway, not a crack, not a gap, a constructed entrance leading somewhere deeper. He watched as military personnel in specialized equipment prepared to pass through it. They moved with the calm efficiency of people who had done this before. He was not authorized to follow. He was sent back to the surface, handed a substantial cash bonus, and required to sign a non-disclosure agreement that threatened federal criminal prosecution. He carried what he had seen in silence for 11 years. Then the cancer diagnosis came, and he called Linda. People should know, he told her. We found something down there, something that changes everything we think we know about history. The testimonies didn't stop. They accelerated. A satellite imagery analyst told Linda that he had watched specific Antarctic coordinates be digitally scrubbed from publicly available data, not reduced in resolution, actively erased, blurred, and replaced. He had seen the original unprocessed images before they were altered. Rectilinear formations, structures that looked engineered. When he flagged it to his supervisors, he was told those areas fell under special access protocols. Not his concern. Stop asking. A materials scientist who had briefly analyzed samples recovered from Antarctic excavation operations described alloys matching nothing in any existing database. Corrosion resistance far beyond anything modern metallurgy can produce. Strength-to-weight ratios that should be physically impossible. Manufacturing signatures that no current technology can replicate. A logistics coordinator for the NSF Antarctic program found equipment manifests in his system that matched no known scientific mission on record. Industrial excavation machinery, sealed transport containers with armed military escorts, entire shipments routed through Department of Defense channels that bypassed scientific oversight entirely. And then came the claim that sent shockwaves through Linda's entire network. Multiple sources, independently, without contact with each other, confirmed that recovered artifacts had been transported to classified U.S. facilities, not for study, for reverse engineering. According to Navy SEAL whistleblowers who later spoke to Linda on record, some of the technology recovered appears to contain what can only be described as self-activating software, operating not through conventional electronics but at an atomic level, embedded directly into the structure of the materials themselves. These systems have been active, continuously, for an estimated 30 to 34 million years. The picture was no longer fragmentary, it was enormous, and it was insisting on being told. By 2020, Linda had compiled over 15 independently verified testimonies, confirmed coordinates, cross-referenced names and military affiliations, and a body of physical and documentary evidence that, taken together, pointed to one of the most significant secrets in the history of modern civilization. Then her sources started dying. The Navy flight engineer, the man on the ridge, the one who started all of this with a single phone call in 1998, died in 2019. Linda received the news and sat with it in silence. The NORAD officer, her most important source, the man whose testimony had connected 20 years of scattered accounts into one staggering coherent picture, died in 2022. Others were in steep decline. Hospital beds, hospice care, fading voices. And Linda, now in her early 80s, understood something with brutal clarity. She was becoming the last person alive who held all of these testimonies together. The last thread connecting the witnesses to the world. That realization changed her. Not just motivated her, terrified her. Because if she waited any longer, 25 years of investigation, the life's work of a dozen dying men who had chosen truth over silence, would vanish. As if none of it ever happened. In a 2023 interview, she stated, "I realized that if I didn't tell this story completely, with all the details and all the sources I could responsibly name, then it would die. These men trusted me. I have a responsibility to ensure their testimonies survive." In late 2023, she began assembling what she has called the Comprehensive Antarctic Report. Every testimony, every coordinate, every operation designation, every piece of evidence gathered across 25 years. She released portions through earthfiles.com in early 2024. She published specific coordinates. She shared declassified Operation Highjump documents with redacted sections hinting at objectives far beyond establishing research bases. She compiled satellite imagery showing artificial data obscuration over the exact areas her sources had identified. And she issued a direct challenge. Other nations have satellites. Independent researchers have ice-penetrating radar. Scientists work on that continent every day. If these testimonies are accurate, the evidence is there. She told the world exactly where to look. The response from every implicated government was identical. Total silence. No denials. No corrections. No legal challenges. No official statements calling it fiction. Not a single government said a word. An Emmy Award-winning journalist publicly accuses multiple world governments of running a 70-year cover-up involving pre-human structures, recovered technology, and reverse engineering operations beneath the Antarctic ice, and not one government on Earth responds. Linda says that silence is the loudest confirmation she could have received. Think about why that is. Discrediting her would be easy. One official statement would end it. But responding to her investigation forces a choice no government is prepared to make. Confirm what she's revealing, or explain why dozens of credentialed military and scientific personnel independently fabricated the exact same story across 25 years, without ever meeting or coordinating. So they say nothing. And the silence grows louder every day. Let's take a breath and think about what we are actually talking about here. If even a fraction of these testimonies is accurate, and Linda has spent a career separating credible sources from fantasists, the implications are civilization-altering. An advanced civilization existed on this planet more than 12,000 years ago. Not primitive, not pre-technological. Advanced enough to construct infrastructure that still stands, in some areas still functional, after millennia under ice. Advanced enough to develop materials and technology that our finest scientists cannot yet explain, let alone replicate. Human history, as we have been taught, it is not the complete story. The neat linear narrative, from stone tools to the Bronze Age to Rome to the Industrial Revolution, is missing an entire chapter. A chapter that was buried under ice and classified at the highest levels of multiple governments. And here's the question that stays with you after everything else fades. If governments have been quietly recovering and reverse engineering technology from a civilization that predates all of recorded history, what have they found? What has already been incorporated into systems we use today, and what are they still working to understand? Linda says she isn't asking anyone to believe her. She is asking them to look at the testimonies. Real people, real credentials, real careers placed on the line by men and women who chose, at the end of their lives, to tell the truth. Those witnesses are mostly gone now, she said, but their testimonies are documented, their accounts are preserved. And whatever happens to me, that record exists. She has deposited copies of her complete investigation, including the identities of sources who gave posthumous permission to be named, with multiple institutions, ensuring the information survives regardless of what happens to her. She kept her promise, to every one of them. Here's the question I cannot shake, and I don't think you can either. If multiple governments have known about structures beneath Antarctica for over 70 years, if they have been systematically recovering technology from a civilization that predates everything in our history books, if they have built an entire apparatus of secrecy around it, while assuring the world that the continent is nothing but ice, penguins, and climate data, then what else are they not telling us? And what happens to all of us when they can no longer keep it hidden? Linda Moulton Howe, at 81 years old, has made her choice. She told the truth. The question now is whether the rest of the world is ready to hear it. If you made it this far, you already know this channel doesn't look away from the stories that matter. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to see it. And drop a comment below. Do you think governments are hiding what's under Antarctica? Let me know where you stand.